Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 116. I'm very blessed to be here with Peter Boonshaft. For people who don't know Peter, Peter, I'm not going to say your bio because I'm not sure we have long enough. You're an inspiration to so many band directors, and I'm just very blessed to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Kyle, for inviting me and for allowing me to be part of this.
So we're going to be talking about so much today. I'd like to start with a section that really struck me about 13 or 14 years ago when I read it, from Teaching Music with Purpose. And it's the preface, and it's called A Little Old Man Who Knew. And I remember reading this and it hitting me so deeply. And now this podcast that we're doing is called The Growing Band Director, and it's that idea of the growth mentality. We're always improving and growing, getting better and all that. So could you summarize that for us?
I sure can. It's one of my favorite stories. It's one I try to share with as many people as I can. It goes back to when I was a freshman in college. I went away to college. I was very intimidated. There I was, a freshman at the conservatory. And I sat in this big auditorium full of students. And I was nervous to begin with. We all have those worries of, do we belong here? Am I good enough? All of those things. And I was very insecure. Sitting in this sea of people who I was sure were all more talented than I ever could be.
Sure.
And I was baffled at the fact that on the stage in this beautiful auditorium, there was nothing set up. There was no band set up. There was no orchestra, no brass choir, no chorus. There was no one there. And I couldn't figure out why they wouldn't start with some kind of a concert or some kind of beautiful music to start the first day of the college year. And I noticed after quite a while that there was this old man wandering up and down the alley between the stage and the first row of chairs. And I saw this gentleman. He was in a very tattered jacket and rips in his pants and was kind of muttering to himself as he's walking back and forth and back and forth. And I started thinking, wow, I wonder if, I should say something, because this is a little odd. This man's just, muttering to himself. He's spitting all over the place. And all of a sudden he grabbed a wireless microphone from the stage that I didn't even see was there. And what he said was basically, when I was 18 years old, I knew everything. And everyone just sat there reverently silent. When I was 28, I realized there was one thing I didn't know. At 38, a few things I didn't know. 48, and he went on. And he said, now I stand before you as an old man, and I don't know anything. And I sat there thinking about this, and he said, the most valuable lesson that I can pass along to everyone is that we don't know anything. And I came to find out that he was a legendary pianist and a remarkable conductor. He was brilliant. He could sit at the piano and you'd say, play, whatever it was, Beethoven 3. And he'd start playing the first movement. And then he'd say, I don't like it in this key. Let's try it in this key. And he'd just instantly modulate in a second. And I started realizing this man will know more in his index finger than I'll ever know my whole life. And as I got to know him over the years, I realized that he was truly one of the most brilliant musicians I've ever known. And I said to him one day in passing, I said, when I was a freshman in college, you lied to me. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, and I told him the story. And he said, Peter, I never lied to you about anything. He said, and until you know that I was telling the truth and understand that, you will never amount to anything, because I don't know anything. And I said, but you're remarkable. He said, no, I'm not. He said, there are pieces that I've never heard of. There are pieces being written right now that I don't know. There are pieces by composers around the world that I'll never get to know. There are things about music that I have no idea about, and I've studied my whole life. And I realized at that moment, it was humbling. It was enlightening to me that I realized that I didn't know anything, and that part of being a good teacher, part of being a good human being, a good musician, was to just not stop growing, to constantly learn more, to never, ever be satisfied. It doesn't mean we don't have to be happy with what we can do and be proud of it, but
Sure.
We always have to keep that in check with, there's so much more for us to learn. And I think truthfully, that lesson is probably the most valuable one that I think most of us as teachers can help our students understand. That there is no finale. There is no end mark.
And I think the fact that if people are listening or watching this, that's a step in the right direction. So the quote that sort of has been motivating me for a while has been a Ray Kroc quote from McDonald's. It says, when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot. So this ever-present growth mentality, The question I have is, a lot of people take that as defeating. Like
Mm.
they're never going to know enough, right? So how do you stay optimistic knowing that you don't know what you need to know?
I can understand what you're saying, how some might think that, but truly, I think it's the opposite. To me, it's inspiring, it's enlivening, it's exciting to think that no matter what we do, we're always going to get better at it. And again, we have to take stock in the fact that we are good at what we do, but that we got there because we learned more,
Hmm.
and that there's, you look at the mountains ahead of you, and all you can see is a mountaintop. When you climb to that mountaintop, though, now you can see peaks that are even higher. And that's what I think the lesson is for all of us, is that we just, the excitement, the idea. I remember finishing, when I finished my doctoral orals, I had sat in a library, as most people do, for months and months and months, just reading everything I could, studying everything I could. And I finished, and I went and finished the doctoral oral exams, and they said, okay, you're done. And they shook my hand. And I remember having this bit of a panic attack, that no longer in my life would I have someone telling me to learn something. And you know what strangely enough, what I did is I went back to the library and I sat on the floor in the library reading more stuff, because it scared me. Would I keep learning despite the fact I didn't have someone telling me to?
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the journey for all of us as students, if you will, to keep going when we don't have to.
I love
And,
that.
and I think that's a beautiful thing for all of us, to be inspired to keep growing and getting better and better and better, because it's going to be more and more exciting.
I love that. And people listening who know your work know you as a legendary conductor, as a legendary writer with all these works and everything that have inspired so many people. What was sort of the springboard to your writing career?
It's a great question. I hope it won't. The answer won't bore you, I hope. I had no intentions of writing. Truth be known, if you had asked any of my English teachers in high school, they would have said there was a better chance of me being a hair model. Um, no intentions at all. Well, I started speaking at conferences, and I was invited by a remarkable woman from Pennsylvania. She was actually the president of the Pennsylvania Music Ed Association, went on to be the Eastern Division president, Carol Myers. Had seen me and asked if I would speak at her convention. And I said, "Oh, Dr. Myers, I don't do that." And she said, "Well, no, I want you to give a clinic." I said, "Well, I don't do that. That's not what I do." She said, "Well, yeah, I'm going to make you do it." And I said, "Well, you really can't make me." She said, "Yes, I can." She said, "The next Eastern Division conference is going to be in Springfield, Massachusetts, and I'm putting you in for a session. And if you don't come, I'm going to stand at the door and tell everyone you were too much of a coward to come." And I said, "Well, you really can't do that." She said, "Yes, I can." And we kind of joked back and forth, and I didn't think anything of it. A month later, I get this invitation. And I called her and I said, "Dr. Myers, I'm not going to do this." She said, "You really need to do this." So I did. I opened my mouth. I started speaking. I saw this room full of wonderful colleagues and teachers and friends, and I was addicted to it. So I started doing lots of that kind of thing, going out to different conferences.
Hmm.
People from other conferences would hear me and kindly invite me. And I was just very lucky. And after several years of this, a friend of mine who worked in music publishing stopped me at a conference, and he said, "So when's the book?" And I said, "What book?" And he said, "The book you're going to write." And I said, "No, there is no chance I'm writing a book." He said, "Well, it's obviously you're going to write a book." I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "People want these quotes. People want these stories. People want this information. You got to write a book on this." I said, "No, I'm not a writer. I don't do that. Thank you anyway. You're very kind, but that's not me." Well, it got me thinking, and then I started hearing it from several other people. And I then met with a couple of folks who had invited me, a couple of publishers had invited me to come speak with them. And three of them were very interested, and I ended up settling with one. And I was just very taken with the fact that anyone would be interested in anything I had to say or write. And I started getting addicted to writing and started enjoying it, which I never thought I would based on my high school performance.
Hmm.
And one thing led to another. And after the first book was done, they had asked if I would do a series of three. And I said, "Oh, okay, fine." After the first one was done, I called them and I said, "There's no way I have two more books in me. Not a chance in heck." And they said, "Well, okay, whatever. If you do, great. If not, don't worry about it." And 6 months later, I had an idea. And I remember I was at LaGuardia Airport, and I literally sat down on a carpet right in the middle of a gate and started writing. And it came out uh, like I was spewing. And it started the second book, and that's the journey. But it really was not an intention, and I'm just
Hmm.
very lucky, and that the people would be kind enough to read them.
Well, if they haven't, they should. And I'm hoping to dive into two of them and then hear about the one that I haven't read. Again,
Yeah,
I feel like the bad student, but I have I've done some research. So again, we were talking off air, like we could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours about all this stuff. But I was in teaching music with passion, and I was kind of looking through like what would I really like to pull out first. And out of this book, you have about a 20-page section where you're talking about how do I get my students to watch me as a conductor. And
right.
there's like paragraph after paragraph, and I've realized how amazing this is and how a lot of people maybe don't know some of this. So I'm hoping I mean, I have it in front of me. I don't know if you have it in front of you or if it's committed to memory or what, but I'd like to kind of hit a lot of these because I think they'd help a lot of people who are listening.
Well, you're very kind, and thank you again, Kyle. That means the world. That was a chapter that, when it hit me, the notion of it. I was in the middle of a rehearsal. I was watching a rehearsal, and of someone else conducting, and and I noticed that the kids were not looking up at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I stopped watching the conductor, and I stopped really listening, and I was more watching the students, trying to figure out what they were doing. And a few, the most dedicated, were looking up occasionally, but for the most part, they were buried in their stand. And I started trying to figure out, why is that? The person up front was really smart, really good musician, very fine conductor. Why weren't they looking? And that started me on this path of trying to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And what I came to understand in my mind was that, in great measure, we do things obviously unintentionally that stand in the way of students needing to watch us. And I realized that that was the key. It was not that I wanted to get them to want to watch me. I needed them to need to watch me.
Yeah.
And it was that difference and I know it's kind of a semantic game, but it really isn't. It was that distinction that put me in the mindset of, what do we do to make students have to look up? And I realized there were several things we did to get in our own way. Things like what I call oral cues, where we count off, or we
Mm-hmm.
yell out letter numbers, or we mouth a rhythm, or we give instructions looking at the score, or we start by looking at the score. That initial downbeat, when we go like this and look down,
Mm-hmm.
and we're buried there. That always scared me. Francis Macbeth, my dear friend William Francis Macbeth, always used to call it musical water polo. When people would be down there looking at the stand, then they'd pop their head up, grab a breath, look at the conductor, and look down. And I started to look for those students who were water polo players, if you will, and realize that that's what I needed to stop. I needed to get them addicted to watching. So I think what it comes down to, in short, is we have to make it meaningful. We have to make it matter that they do watch us,
Mm-hmm.
because then they'll feel invested. They'll have a goal. They'll know the reason I have to look at her or at him is X, Y, and Z. I'm going to get inspiration from their face, that when I look at their face, it tells me how this piece should go. It explains to me what I should feel and move towards that. It allows them to see how invested we are in the music. And it helps them, I think, release their own abilities to feel those kind of things and to feel that way. And then other things that we can do that I think are meaningful to students is, we have to look at them. We have to be staring at their faces, not just looking down Main Street, not just looking at a back bulletin board, not just looking at those one or two or three students who we need to be vigilant watching because they may be causing problems. We need to look at every single student, especially those that aren't maybe the most outstanding, aren't going to be getting in trouble, aren't doing anything wrong, but they're just kind of part of it. And those are the ones who need our eyes and our focus and our facial expressions even more. The face is so communicative. Most people don't realize how incredible it is. For you to look at the conductor, see a face, capture the image, and figure out in your brain what it means, is 1/5 of 1 second. 200 milliseconds is all it takes. And so you think about that, and you compare it to our hands. And as valuable as our hands as conductors are, and our body language is, think about what we can do in a face in 200 milliseconds that would probably take us a couple of beats, maybe a measure, to portray in our hands. But most importantly is, if our hands are meaningful That gives them yet another thing for them to watch us for.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, when I watch her, those hands tell me what to do. That face tells me how to do it. And I feel great about this. And that convinces them to keep watching. And then in the book, I went through a whole scat of techniques, little things that we could do to try to capture more of that. But I think it's one-on-one and then one by one. And then one of the things I mentioned is we have to get the students to understand that when they watch, it matters to us and it's important. So I talk about the little man on your shoulder that, we watch a student and when they look at us, and it might be someone who hasn't looked up for the last 30 minutes of rehearsal, when they do look at us and we can look at them and go like this or point to their eyes and nod, that immediately tells them, wait, he's been looking at me and it matters that I look back. So I need to do that. And I think it's that wonderful circle or cycle of us being in their face, them being back to us and us commending them on that. And I think that's what makes it meaningful.
And, the human connection, what I do more and more as I get older and older is trying to teach my students how important they are and that they bring their life's experiences at their age to making music, because nobody can make music like they can make music.
And ultimately, that to me is what matters most in that communicative cycle. Absolutely.
And obviously people would think that if a student is feeling that way in your class, they're going to feel valued, welcome, and they're going to want to be there.
Without question. And they're going to want to keep at it. They're going to stay in music, even on those days when, okay, that passage is a little frustrating, or I couldn't learn that scale, or the sight reading wasn't so good today. But music matters and music means something to me. And it makes my heart and my soul sing. And I think that's what matters. I mean, to me, one of my favorite stories ever, I was doing an honor band, and it got to a very exposed, very big English horn solo. And the young man playing the English horn was a freshman, and he was struggling, let's just say. And I went up to him and I said, would you like me to give this to one of the upperclassmen? I don't want to put too much pressure. And he said, no, I really want to do this. Well, long story, a little shorter. We kept working at it. And the principal oboist was remarkable. She was utterly astounding. And she came up to me and she said, if you need me to play the solo, I have my English horn. And I said, I appreciate that, but I really want to give him every chance. And she said, okay, I understand, but you let me know. And I said, absolutely. Well, the days went by, of rehearsal. And finally we got towards the concert, and he could get through it pretty well, enough that I really didn't want to shake his confidence. And I said, okay, we're going with this. And at the concert, he mustered everything he had, and it was extraordinary. It was absolutely beautiful. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw this young lady who was the principal oboist reach over and pat him on the thigh and look at him and smile. And I literally just started to cry. It was one of the most touching moments of my life. And she looked at me, he looked at me, and the communication we were able to have while the piece of music was going on, I'll remember till the day I die. And I figured to myself, if we hadn't established that bond of communication through the eyes, face, and all of that, I would have missed that. I don't know whether that opportunity would have happened for them, but it was really significant. And I've had so many of those over the years that I know how meaningful, as we all do as teachers, music can be to students. We just have to help them get there.
So a couple logistical and practical things that you go over that I kind of wanted to highlight a little bit. First of all, let's talk about setup. You talk about them as obstacles, things like the height of the stand and sharing stands and the big pole in the band room and all the things. So what as you travel around and you see bands and band directors and band rooms, obviously in some ways we have to deal with what we're given as a building. But what are some big things that if band directors could all do these things, it would help their setup and their communication?
Well, I think immediately one of the first ones is what I talk about, moving the podium, so that if you could picture, here's the podium, and then this is the edges of our rows, if you will. So here's if the podium was my nose, there'd be the first row, there'd be the second, there'd be the third, but you see they go out. So there's no one sitting in this area. And this area I call the dead zone. And the reason I don't want anybody sitting there is because if they are there, what they're going to be looking at is my backside. And I don't care how talented we are as conductors, we can't communicate with our backside. But by having them that way, which usually just means me pulling back and moving the angles a little bit, now every student in the room can see some of the front of me. Now, is it as good as dead center? Absolutely not, but it's still pretty good. So that's the first thing that I do. The second thing I do is I make sure that the chairs are offset by half a chair, so that if this is the first chair and the second chair in a row. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
The next row, I would have it offset this way. And
So
then the next row like this.
So
It's
yeah,
like
so
a modern movie theater.
each row, each seat is in the window of the two people in front of them.
Exactly right. That window, which is the shoulders, between the shoulders. Now, will that solve the problem if someone is 6'4" and they're in the row behind you? Of course not. But by and large, it makes it so kids won't have to wrench their neck and do this trying to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that helps an awful lot. The third one that I do immediately is I tell students to angle their chairs to me. Because all too often, especially if we use more of an arc row than I do, the chairs are facing this way. So they're basically looking at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that makes it not so easy for them to look at us. So I tell them to angle their chairs 45 degrees. So if this is their chair, they just simply turn it 45 degrees. So it's angled 45 degrees to me, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So they're angled facing. And I basically say, angle your chair and your music stand so you're facing right at my nose. And then the next one that I do immediately is I tell them then to raise their stance. And this I know speaks in the face of tradition, where for some reason, I think it goes back to the Dorsey days and bands like that, where the music stands were basically on the floor. And it grew to become, I know when I was in high school, the cooler you were, the lower your stand was. And unfortunately, that makes for kids looking at their stand, not looking at us. So I immediately tell them, and I invoke the name of the show, Home Improvement, which unfortunately I can't use that analogy anymore because that show's been off the air too long. But I talk about the backyard neighbor whose name was Wilson.
Yeah.
No one ever saw him. This is all you ever saw for the whole time that show ran, because there was a fence right here. And all you saw were his eyes. And to my knowledge, he was never, ever seen. And I say, that's all I need to know.
On the last episode, they let him out.
Oh, did they really?
Yep, on the
there
final
you go.
episode.
Okay.
Yep.
But for all those seasons, they never did. And so I say, I know you have a nose. I know you have a mouth. I know you have a jaw. I don't care. I don't need to see that. What I need to see are your eyes. And the reason is, and I explained to them, if the music stands way down here, I'm going to have to look at the music, look at the conductor, look at the music, look at the conductor. Being human beings, we're all lazy and we're not going to do it very easily or very often. But by raising it, now there's the music, there's the conductor, there's the music, there's the conductor. And I can look up and down 10 times, not fatigue myself. And most importantly is it helps the sound of the band, because every time a student does this to look down, they're collapsing their body posture. Mm-hmm. And so everything changes. The breathing mechanism changes, the neck and throat change, the jaw changes, the aperture, embouchure, hand position, arm position, and it makes it so much harder. At the very least, we're changing the tone quality and the intonation of the band every time children do this or students do this. Now, I've had people argue that say, yeah, but if you get, Phil Smith to play, he could, twist himself upside down and play. And my answer is, yeah, if Phil's in your band, great, that's perfect. But if Phil isn't in the band, I think we need to attend to it. And I really believe that our intonation, our tone quality is so much better when we don't have that constant moving up and down. This way, the only thing that moves are the eyeballs, nothing else. And I think that really does help.
And then, so if we're set up that way, then we move to the warm-up. Again, I've watched bands where you can tell within 10 seconds that the kids aren't watching them. It's the same warm-up they do every day, all 180 days and all the things. And so let's talk about like some of the ways we can vary warm up, not only for music success, but with the conductor communication. I'll just throw one in before you take them all. One thing that's super easy to do that I assume people do is say you start with a major scale and half notes or whatever it is, like change your tempo. Don't stay the same. By the time you get to the fourth or fifth note, speed up or slow down, stop on a note, cut them off, make them watch you from the beginning as a habit.
Absolutely. I go so far as to add to that. I don't even do the rhythm. I won't even tell them what the rhythm is. I just give it to them. So it might be T, T, ta, T, T. I make the whole thing up. Mm-hmm. I agree 100%. I've always said that the problem with warm-ups and ensemble development activities is that we do too much on autopilot. And if I had $1 for every time I've walked into a band room where I hear dum 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 dum, et cetera, et cetera. To me, it's like whipping a horse to go around the track. There's nobody who's paying attention to music. They're not worrying about their tone or the
Mm-hmm.
musicality or their pitch. They're just going through the motions. And I would rather have one beautiful concert B flat major triad with a beautiful attack, core, and release than 2 hours of that nonsense. So what I always say is we have to balance routine, which we do need for structure, for the kids to feel safe, to understand their environment, to save time.
And they have to build technique, right? I mean, they do
Absolutely.
have to do that too.
That's right. But we have to balance that by having enough differences in what we do. So I always say if I've done a warm up more than twice in a week, I can't do it again for another couple of weeks because
Mm-hmm.
I don't want them to do it on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe if we're going to do, let's say, a passing the tonic in E flat major, which I think is a gold standard exercise, I can't do the same passing the tonic every day in E flat major. I have to have 3 or 4 of them in E flat major so that they're slightly different. The concept's the same, what they're learning is the same, and they're getting that down, but they're not doing it on autopilot. So years ago, I had worked on a series of exercises because I really think that ensemble development is the missing key for some development of ensembles, because I feel like we spend too much time teaching for the test. We hand out music, let's say 4 or 5, whatever it is, pieces, and we learn them for the first concert. And then we hand out another 4 or 5 pieces, and we're constantly teaching for the test. Well, I get that we have to do that somewhat, but I think we could save so much more time and be so much more efficient and help students get better if instead of doing that, we teach ensemble concepts and then apply them to the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So if, let's say, I'm teaching forte pianos in let's say, B flat major triad, I need to isolate that from everything else and teach it as an ensemble warm-up skill.
Mm-hmm.
So they learn what it is, they execute how to do it, they learn without looking at music what my hands look like when I'm doing that. So then I can put it into measure 19 in XYZ piece, and I can say, what am I doing? Oh, that's one of those forte pianos we did. That's right. And I don't have to keep teaching the test. I got so frustrated by this. The good folks at Alfred Music gave me the opportunity of writing a series of books
Mm-hmm.
called Sound Innovations Ensemble Development. We did a young band one, an intermediate, and an advanced band. And they're all totally different exercises with tons of chorales because I wanted people to have this variety of exercises so they could do, let's say, a rhythmic exercise that has to do with syncopation. There's a bunch of them in there so they can constantly be practicing it, but not doing it on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
If they're doing an interval study, they can do an interval study in E flat major, but it's not the same exact one. It's the same concept, but not the same study. And I think by doing that, we can save so much wear and tear on our students, and we can get so much farther along.
There's another conducting exercise I watched of my friend Jean Quinn, who just retired. She was doing a 7th and 8th grade honor band here recently, and one of the pieces they were doing was Mike Sweeney's arrangement of the second movement of Lincolnshire Posy.
Yes.
So her warm up on the concert day was simply, we're going to play a concert B flat scale, and you're only going to change notes when I get to count 1. But I'm going to conduct 4/4, 3/4, 2/4, 5/4 in any random order. So they had to watch to know when to do that. And it was just a brilliant application of taking something they're doing that's simple and then doing it in warm up.
Anything, I love it. Anything that we can do where they're not having to read the fuzzy little black dots on a piece of paper, but can concentrate on us, on them, and on the skill at hand. By isolating that way, I think we are just putting the kids in position to do great things. I really do.
I've one other little thing that I've done that people really like is I'll do we talk about doing it like a round, right? Concert B flat scale and round or whatever. I'll do that with all 40 players of the group. So it's like, one kid would start and then the next kid, and it just goes, right. And they have, as they do that, they're playing alone, but they have to match with people on either side of them. And it like snakes its way through the band. And it's a really cool basic exercise that works really well.
That's really neat. Yeah. And again, you're teaching independence, you're teaching listening skills, all of those wonderful things.
Again, picking stuff out of these books is like, I don't know, choosing between your children. There's so much and all here that's great. So
you're way too kind, Kyle.
Oh, well, it's true. So there's a section of teaching music with purpose where you talk about the title of the short chapter is, but it's only a rehearsal. And I put in quotation marks, maximizing every day, thinking about sort of our perspective on the day and how that is. So I don't know. I'm just struck at that, and I want to have a conversation around it.
Well, it's very important to me. It's a message I try to get across to anyone who will listen. When I was teaching music educators to be, it was a lesson that I really wanted them to hear. But the truth of the matter is, I think it's mostly how we model it. That
Hmm.
each of us, in our own way, models that to every one of our students in rehearsals, lessons, classes, whatever it happens to be. And it's this notion that every chance we have to make music is so vitally important. And that every moment matters. I tell a story that's one of my favorite about being in a very, very socioeconomically deprived area of the United States. And there was a plaque on a door going into the room that they were able to perform in. And the plaque said, "Today I will give everything I have. For anything I keep, I will have lost forever." And it struck me so profoundly that I literally started to weep. I just sat there crying, knowing I needed to go on stage for a performance. And it hit me as I was trying to mull over, why was I so struck by this? Why was I so um, taken by these words? And I realized that that socioeconomic level be darned, that they were the richest people I ever knew. And the only person that anyone should have felt sorry for was me, not them. And it was because their richness, their what made them so special was that they had a work ethic that drove them to know that no matter what they endeavored to do in that room, whether it was a big sporting event or a game or a concert or a test or whatever it was, that it had to be the very best they could. And I thought to myself that that's the work ethic that every one of us
Hmm.
and, and every one of our students needs to have. And I started thinking that that's really what's so important to get across in our rehearsals and classes, is that every second that we get to make music is a gift, and that we can't squander that gift. And yeah, can we tell a joke occasionally, and can we have a laugh, and can we take a moment to breathe? Yes, absolutely. But that the essence of what we do is that we have only this much time to make music today, and this much time to make this month, and this much in our lifetime, and that it's so precious that we have to value every moment. And this notion of and I've had people say, well, I'm not going to try that, or it's just a rehearsal, or I don't need to really get into it, it's just a rehearsal. But there is no such thing as a rehearsal for us. It's making music. That's the event. That's the thing. And the notion of the concert is what matters drives me out of my mind.
Hmm.
And I tell everyone, and I've told every all-state band I've ever conducted, every university band I've ever conducted, I could care less about the concert. And I've always said this. Ask any student who's worked with me. I could care less. I mean, I hope it goes well, but I could care less. What matters to me are the minutes that we work tirelessly in rehearsals to make music for one reason, to make music.
Hmm.
It's for us. It's not for an audience. It's not for a recording device. It's not for a television. It's not for radio. It's because we have the ability. They have the talent. They have the gift to make music. And I think that is ultimately, to me, one of the most valuable lessons we can give them.
I love it. And the first part of that, as you were talking, struck me. In the past year and a half, as we've been doing lots of episodes with all these teachers around the country,
Mm-hmm.
um, the secrets, quote unquote, of having a quality program, at least I think at any level, kind of I've started boiling down into three things, and one of those is striving for mastery. Really focusing that, because to me, when you're talking about making every day matter,
Yeah.
you're trying to make each day your masterpiece, right? Doing everything you can that day, and then closing the book and moving on and trying
Yeah.
again the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And every day we have to get better, and every day we have to try harder. Now, are there going to be days? We all know as teachers, there are going to be days where it's going to feel like we've gone backwards, where we've
Hmm.
slipped back, or weeks that we feel like that. But ultimately, the trajectory that we know they're on, we have to keep them on, is one where they keep getting better at being musicians, at being part of an ensemble, at technicians, as people. We just keep moving in that direction.
So now I want to hit the book that I have not read, and I'm very curious about the overall theme about this.
Right.
What led you to write Teaching Music with Promise?
Promise. Teaching music with promise was the third in this series, and I have to tell you, people have always said, which is your favorite book? And I say I have three kids. I love them all equally, and it's very much the same with the books. I love them all equally. They are all different. There's nothing repeated in any of them. I've made sure of that. Teaching music with promise. I would say that originally when I thought about writing this series, one book was going to be on how we inspire and motivate students. One was going to be on rehearsal technique, and one was going to be on conducting. And I realized as I started to write the first book that no one wanted to read an entire book on any of those three topics, that could be pretty numbing. So I decided early on to break up the three books in my outline and to have each one have about a third on each of those topics. And Teaching Music with Promise, I think, is possibly the most practical of them. I've had many people say it's their favorite. It has a lot of ensemble development things, how we can go about developing an ensemble, how we make a band get better. Step by step what we can do. And I go through every aspect of it, from tuning and warm-ups and sight reading and everything else that I can possibly to muster up. And then with hopefully a firm dose of inspiration, motivation, conducting, all of those other things. I really love the book. It's the newest of the three, but I was really, really pleased with it. And as I said, many people have said to me that of the three, that's the one they like the best.
Okay, so without giving away too much in the book, what are a couple practical things that are from there we can do with our bands today?
Well, there's so many things, it's hard to pick and choose, but if I had to pick a few of them, one of them is a little quote that I came across about the words yes if versus no because. And this really just opened my mind. It was like the sun coming out and parting the clouds in the sky when I realized how important that was. When students say XYZ and we say, no, we can't do that because. And I realized how limiting that was. It puts a wall down. It makes it as firm. Versus if we say, yes, if blank, blank, blank. And I know it seems, again, like semantics, but it's so powerful. If the students say, can we play this piece? And we say, no, because it doesn't fit into the program. If we say, yes, we can, if we can learn the key of E flat major, and we have to learn this rhythm and whatever it is. If we constantly have that mentality of yes, if, it doesn't put down a wall. It might not make it happen, but it gives them that opportunity of what they need to do or why we're not doing it, so to
Sure.
speak. One of my favorite chapters is one about a custodian by the name of Jake, who helped me with a very valuable lesson, which came from my mentor of all mentors. And he had an expression that said, tact, praise, and kindness is the shortest distance from where you are to where you need to be. And it's a story in there about Jake, my dear friend, helping me, let's just say, change a situation when I was teaching in a boiler room. So I got moved out of the boiler room. And rather than fight it, I came up with a tactful way with his help. And I got moved. And it really is a lesson valuably learned. The biggest chapter is the one on rehearsing with purpose, which is the one I mentioned, which has all the ensemble skills and techniques. That. One of my favorites in the book is a chapter entitled Perché, which means why. And it hit me because, and I'll tell you the story, I hope it's not too long-winded. I was in Venice conducting, and I was on one of the boats in the canal, and one of their basically taxis, water taxis. And I saw this adorable little girl, with what I was guessing was her grandfather. And I speak no Italian. And all I was taken with was this little charming young woman kind of bouncing around with her grandfather. And all I could hear was her saying, perché? And the grandfather would say something, and she'd just come back with perché. And this went on for what seemed to be at least 20, 25 minutes. And the only thing she kept asking was why. And grandpa kept telling her things. And I realized that that's the kind of curiosity that we need to instill in every child, in every student. That wild-eyed why can we do this? Why does this happen? Why does it work better when I do this? Why is this the easiest way to do that? Like whatever it happens to be. And it's a chapter on that, which I really think is a neat one. One of my favorites is on finding another way, which is the fact that we all as teachers will deal with frustration. We do it all the time. And it's a couple of vignettes on how to get around that and how to make that work in our favor. Another one which I really like, which has been a favorite of mine for a long time, is Does Your Band Sound Better from the Back? And it's what got me started on this was I was working with a band in Oklahoma, wonderful high school band. And I had conducted them for a couple of hours, and it was time for me to take a break and for their their conductor to work with them for a half an hour or so. And they were really good group, well trained, and I had a ball with them. But we really had some work ahead of us. This was the very first rehearsal for a week I was going to be there as a guest conductor. And I knew we had a lot of work ahead of us with balance. That was my biggest issue. The balance I wasn't as pleased with. But I thought, you know what? We have 4 days till the concert. It's going to be fine. Well, in the back of their band room, they had stacked these giant packing cubes that they used to pack all the instruments for when they went on tour. And so I climbed up there with my towel, and I was taking the sweat off my brow and sitting up there listening. And this fellow's name was John. John started rehearsing. And all of a sudden I thought, wow, this band's balance is amazing. Why is it so good for him? And it was so mediocre for me. And I thought, what the heck? What is the secret? What did he do? So I got down off the cartons and I started walking around the band. And as I got towards the front, it went right back to the just, let's say, okay balance. And all of a sudden it hit me that the band's sound in the back is very often much, much better balanced than that which we hear in the front. And I realized that the lesson that I had was that's why it's a challenge to get certain instrumentalists in the back of our band to really understand balance, because from their vantage point, it sounds great. Think about it. The trumpets, the flutes, all the higher end instruments are all way away from the tubas, and they're aimed by and large forward. So they're not getting blasted with all that soprano of our soprano, alto, tenor, bass pyramid, if you will. That's all aimed that way. The luscious French horn, well, for the most part, it's probably bell is aimed to them or somewhat like that. So think about it. The tubas are hearing a ton of tuba because it's that omnidirectional sound. So they're hearing a lot of tuba, very little soprano, and they're thinking, we are balanced. We have a beautiful pyramid that Francis Macbeth gave us. And I had to convince them that that's not the sound they had to balance to. The sound they had to balance was the one that we could hear on the podium or in the front row of the auditorium. And all of a sudden, it was a giant light bulb that went off. And I ran up to the podium and I basically pushed my colleague away. And I said, listen, I need to talk to them for a minute. And I just couldn't stop. It was like verbal diarrhea. I just couldn't stop talking to the kids about this. And I said, listen to this. And I realized then that was the secret to teaching balance, was it does sound good to them. Everything we lecture them about, it has to have that bottom sound, blah, 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 is all right there in front of them. So that's one of my favorites in there. But it was just so many of them and a whole bunch on conducting. It's just, I really like the book. As you can tell, I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. We're going to finish up with a couple of member questions. People,
Okay.
I put a member question out there, and
Beautiful.
what do people want to hear? So we got a lot of them, and we got a time for a couple of them. So we're going to start with
Excellent.
Kristen. Kristen is a middle school teacher and beginner teacher. Her question is about helping with retention through school changes, especially from elementary to middle and middle to high, when kids are offered so many other extracurricular options at each level. So what are our ways that we can keep kids in our program?
Wow, Kristen, what a great and timely question. I mean, that's always been a question for the ages, but I think now post-COVID might be even more so in some ways. So thank you for asking the question. It is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I think that retention is one of the most important things we need to do. And I have to tell you, when I first started teaching, we never talked about it in college. The notion of advocacy and retention, it really never came up. We had lots of kids and programs were solvent and doing well. And I really never heard those words. And I certainly wasn't taught anything about them. And then as the decades moved forward, it started to become much more important, to the point now where I think it's quite important. And what I talk about is that all too often in our profession, we do what I call the salmon principle of retention. And that is, we start a whole gaggle of kids in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, whenever it is. And then we send them upstream, and them's that make it to the top, great. Some are going to get eaten by bears. Some are going to, get dashed on the rocks, whatever is the fate of these salmon, but not that many of them get to the top. And that to me is a problem. And I think we need to spend quite a lot of mental energy, physical energy, making certain that we do retain kids. And so some of the things that I think and this one sounds kind of sophomoric to even say, is we have to make it so appealing that they feel compelled to stay with us and to stay with music and to stay with band. that there's no alternative. I mean, think about it. To you, to me, to I'm sure everyone listening to your wonderful podcast, there wasn't a choice. It wasn't a question. Was I going to be in band next year? You bet. Band was so important to me. My band directors were so important to me. The music was so important to me. So I think it comes down to a couple of things. And then we can go on to more lengthy details of this. But the one is we have to make band so enjoyable. Now, I don't want you to think it just means that we're having fun. Yes, we have to have fun, but we have to make it so fruitful, so enlightening, such a positive experience that people love it. They get emotional feedback for it. They get those peak musical moments that when they get out of rehearsal, when they get out of concerts, this is just such a valuable part of their life that it's part of them. It is simply bound to them. And then after that, that's most important. To make the experience that valuable to them in every way is showing how much we care about them individually. If I know that my band director cares about me, I am sticking with it. Even on the days where I'm done, I don't want to play that anymore, I'm going to stick with it because I know when they come up and say, hey, you're doing a great job, or write a little note home to my folks and say, Peter did okay today. He didn't slouch once in band, or, Peter did great. His posture was perfect. Make sure you tell him that. So things like notes home, talking to the kid and just walking up to kids and saying, you were really great today. I can't believe your posture. It was so good. It takes a minute, but it's so valuable because they'll never remember what you say. They'll remember how it made them feel. And I think if we can do that more often, I try to make it a rule that we do that as often as we can to every student. And I literally would take a grade book and check off, okay, I was able to hit these kids this week. Next week, I have to hit these kids, to make them feel that I am really committed to them and I feel positive about that. The next one, which to me is the biggest issue for band directors, and we could liken this to choir and orchestra as well, is that we live in our own village all too often. Now, I know there are going to be some listeners who teach elementary, middle, and high school. There are going to be some that are only in one building. So every circumstance is different. But very often what I find is the middle school band directors don't have anything to do with the elementary school band directors enough. High school to the middle the same way. And I feel it this way, that if moving buildings is so scary. I think back to the day before school started every September. I was sick to my stomach. I was up all night. I was so worried. And the years that I was really worried was when I was going to a new building. And if we can put ourselves in those shoes again, of we were going from elementary to middle or middle to high school, it was the scariest thing on earth. And going to a new program, okay, I don't know the band director. They don't know me. I don't need to do this. I'm going to do something else that's safer. I don't want to worry about this. But if we can make our presence an absolute part of these kids' lives, so that the high school band director is known by every kid who plays a band instrument, all the way down to fourth grade or whenever they begin, that the middle school person's there all the time. And I know it's hard with schedules, but if we can regulate, not just at recruiting day for next year before the guidance tells us that we're about to do schedules, but that we're there on a regular basis. Hey, Miss Smith is there today. Let's say hi to Miss Smith. I can't wait till you guys are in the high school and get to play with her. Or Mr. Jones came down from the middle school. Let's welcome Mr. Jones. Or walking around helping with hand position or fingerings or whatever. They get to know us as people. So that now when I'm making my choices for next year, going from, let's say, 8th grade to 9th grade, here's my choice. I don't know anybody in the high school. I don't know any of the teachers. I don't know any of the administrators, but I know one person. I know Miss Smith, the band director, and I need an ally. I need a friend. I need a smiling face, and she's going to be the one. I'm going to be in band. And I think by having that as that life jacket for kids to reach for, but it's got to be sincere. It's got to be real. And it's got to be ever present. It can't just be a one-time visit. But the notion of us doing it, I think, is the single most important thing we can. That if we can all work together as a team, however many band directors there are in the district, that we work together to establish that it's a band program from senior year all the way down to beginners in 4th or 6th grade or whenever it is you begin. And I think that to me is the most important thing, because I've seen it work time and time again. When the kids know those people, they're going to hold on to them like it's a life jacket.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about, different keys to successful programs, and one of them, I think the cornerstone is relationships with other people. So you
Absolutely.
just hit it. As you're writing, the first thing I wrote was people underlined.
It
It's
is.
all about the connection of people.
Right. I mean, we talked about the directors, but I think the students just as much. I remember, I can tell you a little story that really is what made me have this crystallized in my head. When I was in middle school, I was in sixth grade. One day during the cafeteria, the high school choir director brought down the high school madrigal singers. And this small choir, I'm going to guess there were about 18, 20 of them, came down and they walked around the cafeteria singing. And it blew me away. I was so taken with this. The students walked around and talked with us. I remember this one, I came to find out senior soprano came over to my table and she started talking to us and started saying, hey, you guys are in the choir? I'm like, no, well, yeah, I mean, you got to be in the high school choir. It's the coolest thing on earth. Oh, well, I fell madly in love. I have to tell you, I joined high school choir because in my mind, I had it that, we were going to grow old together and
Hmm.
my brain hadn't figured out that she had graduated 5 or 6 years before I ever got to the high school, but it didn't matter. It was that she helped make a connection. All of those students did.
Hmm.
But I saw myself in the future. And I said, I want to be part of that. And I think it is, as you said, people. It's every one of the people that can get a connection with every one of those students. Because I think part of it is making it an easy choice.
Hmm.
We need to make it easy for a kid to say, oh no, Dad, I want to be in band next year. Well, you could do a lot of other things. I know, but I really want to be in band. I want to try this too, but I want to be in band
Yep.
because I feel great when I play my trumpet or when I play my clarinet. And I want to be part of this.
I have one little bit to add to this too. Something I struggle with. We talk about making this music relevant to the age of where they're at.
Right.
I heard a composer online recently talking about just try adding a little bit more pop music throughout the year for your kids to connect with. It's not something I do almost ever. We have like here's a pops concert, but other than
Right.
that, we don't do much of it. But can you find maybe half a dozen great arrangements that you love that you can teach music, but also kids can connect with? And they said the bands who can do that have better retention as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the things that I've always talked about to follow on that is sometimes it doesn't even need to be pop music as much as more, let's say, commercial popular sounding.
Hmm.
There are some wonderful, wonderful pieces in our repertoire that aren't from popular music, so to speak. You couldn't hear them on a CD or on the radio or that kind of thing. But they sound popular and the kids love. And I've got a list of them that I keep in the back of my head that when I need one, I'll say, I'm going to pull that out. It's not the same as doing a pop tune from something they'd hear on television,
Hmm.
but it has all that spirit, all that energy, all of that feel, and they love that. So I think a combination of both of those things, yeah, because ultimately we've got to keep them in the program.
And another little tiny thing you can do if you're doing any soundtrack or movie music, you take the arrangement you have one of your kids make an iMovie from the clips of the actual movie that fits the arrangement you're doing, put it above the band and do a concert of those, and you got them hooked.
Anything we can do to hook kids, to
Yep.
hook families, to hook administrators, that they see us as part of what is crucial in a child's development. I'm game for any of it.
Yep. All right, we got one more question from Brian that we're going to get to today. What
Okay.
are your approaches to balancing audience entertainment? We just started talking about this, and engagement versus artistic and educational merit for the students.
Well, we basically just talked about that.
Yeah,
To tell you the truth, that's really what I would say. But I think also one little part of this, Kyle, is that part of our job, I think, is to help with the musical education of the audience as well.
agreed.
Uh, I remember one of my earliest teaching experiences. I had a woman come up. I had a French horn player whose mom came up at the end of the very first concert and said, "It all sounded fine, but I really hated the music." And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry." She said, "Can't you do anything like from Broadway or from movies or, pop stuff?" It was all of this, serious music. And I said, "Well, some of it wasn't that serious." "Well, yeah, but I mean, it sounded good, but you should do stuff for us." Well, fast forward 4 years later, he was graduating from high school, and the same mother came up holding a box. And she said, "This is for you." And I opened it and I said, "Should I open it?" She said, "Yes, please open it." So I did. She said, "This is from my family to you. This is in lieu of payment for our music appreciation lessons."
Hmm.
She said, "Do you remember when I stood on this podium 4 years ago and talked to you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "I now get it." She said, "You taught us as much as you taught the kids."
Hmm.
And I still have that beautiful glass vase on my desk in my home. It really, brought a tear to my eyes, because I thought that is part of what we do. But I agree that we can't do it all at once. I mean, if you're going into a new program and they're used to doing 4 pop tunes at every concert for
Yeah,
their whole year, and we come in and do nothing but whole suites and Vaughan Williams, we're not going to have a job next year, because the kids will rebel. I'm guessing many would quit. Families will rebel. Administrators will probably rebel because the phone won't stop ringing.
hmm,
Um, I think part of our job is to take them where they are and lead them on the same journey we have to lead children on, our students on, to develop them. But if we lose them doing it, then it doesn't matter. It's
sure.
the tree falls in the woods and there's no one to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Well, I don't know about the answer to that, but I know that no matter how good we might be as a band director, if we don't have students in front of us, it doesn't really matter. So ultimately is we do have to do those things to keep the audience engaged, the administrators engaged. I think one little thing that I've always loved doing is getting administrators as part of the concert, because all too often I find administrators don't really understand what we do. We're in that room down at the end of the hallway that noise comes out of, and they
Hmm.
really don't understand us. Now, if we're lucky and we have someone who played in band or someone who was a former music teacher as a superintendent or a principal, that's great. But all too often we don't. So years and years ago, I started doing things where I would invite those administrators to come and be part of it. So I'd have them come narrate. And if I didn't have a piece that I could do with narrator, I would get a poem that matched the piece, and I'd invite them to come and do it. One of my favorite little pieces was a piece for elementary band called Concerto Gross by John Kenyon. And it called for a little group of soloists, like a concerto grosso would, and they played things like kazoo and slide whistle. One of them was hitting a salami on a tam-tam. It was all of these joke things. And I did it having at a school. I was guest conducting, and it was one of my former students who did it with their elementary band. And she got, as this group of soloists, the superintendent, all of the building principals, the chairman of the school board, director of curriculum, all of these people, these administrators came, and they played all these goofy instruments. Now, they didn't really need to read music. I could just point to them. But what it did is, first of all, the kids thought it was a hoot because there were all these important people in their lives making silly sounds. But what the importance was that those administrators, for some of them at the first time in their life, figured out, understood what it is we do. More importantly, what it is our kids do.
Hmm.
All of a sudden they realized, wait, the director's standing there waving their arms. The kids understand it, react to it. So that language they understand. Then they're reading those dots on a page, that graph that means something to them, foreign language terms. They're counting, they're doing fractions, and in their brain as administrators are saying, holy moly, these kids in this environment are doing things that are so extraordinary. All of a sudden, music has a better place at the table.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, we're now understood a little bit better. Having a principal come and read a narration, they have to sit through our rehearsal and be part of this. They now understand what our kids are doing in those rehearsals. And I think it can only help the process. And I've seen it so many times, time and time again, where it really does help the process.
Another practical one that I'm doing again this year, I've done before. I have my superintendent who loves reading, and reading is very important.
Yeah.
'Twas the night before Christmas. We're doing the Jack Bullock arrangement in Easy Grade
Absolutely.
3, and the kids put on their PJs and come on up, and it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Also for beginning band, Aunt Rhodey's Appetite is one of those pieces that you can get a bunch of teachers in, and it's hilarious. It's a riot.
All of those things. And I'll bet you money that if you find those young kids when they're seniors in high school or college students, I bet you say, what are some of the most memorable pieces from elementary school?
Hmm.
They're only going to remember those really funny ones like that,
Sure.
those really cool ones, or those that made them feel something in their heart.
Yep.
And I think what better gift to give kids?
Peter, thank you so much for being on. Appreciate it so much.
Kyle, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. I hope we can do it again. And I wish you and all your listeners all the best for a wonderful school year.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.